Hi, it's Ryo Koyama. Welcome to Choose Your Stack. We are live at the MCP Dev Summit in New York, and I'm very pleased to have Chris DiBona from the Office of the CTO of Microsoft here. Not everybody realizes that at least for the old heads like me, they're always surprised to hear Microsoft and open source, but
Oh, yeah.
Microsoft is probably the biggest contributor to open source, so I don't know if you want to add a little bit of color for our listeners here.
Yeah, starting about 10 years ago, they really sort of turned a corner, maybe a little more than that. They really turned a corner on contributing to various projects and making sure also that the projects ran well on top of their platforms, And then it sort of culminated about 6 years ago when they purchased GitHub. That was sort of like the really big news. That was like, oh, I guess they're really serious, and it's been a heck of a thing. I only started at Microsoft 7 months ago, so I'm like the newest person possible you could have found. So, and this whole Agentic AI Foundation was almost like my starter project because I was like a month into the job. Friends at Anthropic and OpenAI, they're like, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing with the Linux Foundation. Do you know anybody who knows the Linux Foundation? And I'm like, oh, I know something about that. And so this was my way of figuring out how Microsoft makes decisions, how it writes a check, how it signs a contract. And, because I know how to do foundation stuff for years. So it was a really good way to figure out how things work in the company.
That's probably in itself a very, very valuable skill set.
And through it, I found Katie McCaffrey, who's our technical advisory committee co-chair with David Perra. And it's like, finding the people who care about this realm of computer science inside Microsoft. It's been really, really great, for this newcomer to this massive company, right? So
You've been around enough. You've seen the many, many cycles. I always joke that what's old is new again.
Oh, yeah.
How do you view the whole MCP thing in the world?
Oh, so the thing about MCP that I really, really like is there's a lot of excitement around these agents and around the world of AI-assisted coding and AI-assisted process management and everything, right? And so MCP only came out like a year ago, right? And the thing that David and the team nailed with MCP was they made it really, really easy for developers to try it out, right? They're like, hey, here's the path. You're going to stand up temperature, MCP. It's simple. You're not going to want to use this long term, but it'll give you an idea of how the transports work, how your model will call the agent, and how it will respond. And it was like a very simple, explanation and demonstration, and all the code was there for that. And so people did what they do when they have really good developer communications. They are like, oh, yeah, I can experiment with this. And then they add a little bit to the experiment. And they say, oh, well, it's not temperature. We're going to actually pull this information from our database. We're going to pull this information from our file system. We're going to pull this information from our sales system, right? And then they're like, oh, this is kind of working. And before you know it, they're building really complex agents. And MCP use was going through the roof, right? And so we're watching this from Microsoft, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh, this is really exciting. And there's always people who are like, but it's not a very mature thing. And I was like, yeah, but you're going to want to be with the one that can be mature, that can become what you need it to be, as opposed to, putting a lot of time into extremely complex protocol standards and interfaces that nobody uses.
Yeah, I
because they can't do anything with it.
Yeah, I always joke because it's like, well, I tried to explain to people like PostScript has 9 versions, but everybody stopped at 2.
Yeah.
And it's like the adoption tells you so much. And like, it's that whole famous Instagram story where they wanted to be, Photoshop for mobile phones, but then they just shared photos and they stopped, and it's like that really makes a big difference, I think.
Well, it's really funny too, because Instagram, one of the things that they did that a lot of people didn't notice is they didn't have their own filters. They just used the ones that were built into the iPhone. This is why they didn't have an Android version forever. They're like, well, it's easy just to use the ones provided by the operating system. So we're going to do that. And they renamed them to Valencia or whatever, and it's like, and that was key to what they were doing. So they kept their surface very, very thin, and then they let, because why would they want to recreate filters if they're already available to them in the operating system? It's the same thing we've been saying in open source for literally decades. It's like, why would I want to rewrite an operating system or a database or a framework when what I want to do is over here, It's like I want to be cool on top of all this proven, tested software, and it's really interesting.
Well, I think you hit on a couple of points. I mean, I always joke that always the physics, which is law of least effort.
Yeah.
But to your point, I always find it interesting because a number of people get very paranoid. It's like, well, what if I release it open source, people steal it? I mean, people want to build something else. It's like if you build something people want to build on top of, and there's plenty of things that people want to be able to do, and it doesn't necessarily fit into what exactly you do. So back in the ancient times, like 6 months ago, I was joking that MCP was like the app store moment for AI. But now, obviously, again, it's ironic. We're going back to the future. So now the conversation is about CLI and everything. But I think one of the things that's very interesting is that I was making the argument earlier that maybe MCP is the human interface and CLI is the agent interface. But then someone said, well, maybe it's the opposite. You have any thoughts on CLI and MCP?
I see them as complementary technologies. When I see like what happened with OpenClaw, right? It's like OpenClaw is what happens when you don't have an interface to give your agent, to give your LLM. So they're like, well, we'll just build a harness on top of Chrome. And it's like, yeah, I get it, but that's pretty insecure. You're giving a lot of permissions to this tool when you probably want to give it a defined interface and tell it what it can and can't do with that information. And they're like, oh, that sounds like work, man. And it's like, I get that, but it's actually a really good pointer that these agentic interfaces are really important to get done well and done fast, so that people don't do ridiculous things for not having them. And so when I don't see it as an MCP versus CLI, I see CLI as using the MCP agents, and where MCP agents are going, they're just more tools for the tool chest for these agents and these LLMs. It's like I don't know if you've used like the amplifier harness or the superpowers collection on top, which you invoke inside Claude directly. Amplifier sits on top of Claude and calls to Claude or other coding agents, and it's like watching them work, and the transcripts are really incredibly entertaining too, because it says, oh, I'm going to call this tool now. I'm going to do this. And you're watching the amplifier harness talking to Claude Code, talking to the agents. And it's as a programmer for 35 years or 40 years? Gosh, I'm pretty old. Watching this happen has been so much fun. And so when I see like the CLI argument, oh, it's this versus MCP, or MCP's dead and we're going to go this direction, I'm like, you know what? You're going to keep using it. And that's cool. That's exactly why we're doing it, so that we can be part of this velocity and provide that velocity in, frankly, a safer fashion than just, having Pi Auto GUI on top of Chrome.
No, I think you're right. I think velocity is so much the key point. So one of the things I think is interesting is like if you look at like the last 10 years, I mean, software evolution has been about making it more human usable. But then I think we're hitting an interesting era now where pretty quickly I think we're going to get to very, very non-human readable code, because it'll be a lot more efficient. So where do you think we are on that scale, and what do you think the impact of that is versus like you're going to see a lot more? I think the conventional wisdom is that now you see a lot more creative people because they won't even care about the planes of development.
So there was a discussion we had in the late 90s, and people would be like, oh, how many people do you think are really using Perl or really using Python, right? And then I'd say, well, I mean, how many people are programming in Excel? How many people are programming in Visual Basic Pro 3.0? And they're like, oh, well, those people aren't really programmers. And I'm like, I defy you to go into one of these finance shops or one of these like accountancies and look at their spreadsheets and you tell me that's not programming. And it's like when I watch people like, oh, well, it's not really programming what they're doing with these agents. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. If you look at the discussion a person is having with Claude or Codex or Gemini or Copilot, and they're like saying, hey, I really want to do this thing in this way unless you have a better option. There's programming going on there. And the thing I take away from all this, because you said, oh, more creative people who aren't traditional programmers are going to be able to do all this stuff now. What does that mean? It's like, what it means is that as a computer industry, we can finally actually meet the promise that we've been giving our users for decades now. It's like we've given them so much great hardware, so much capacity, so many tools, and they can't use them. Now we're finally at the point where it's like somebody can say, you know what, I bet your computer should be able to do this thing. And they explain it to their LLM. Like, I need a thing that does this. Can you do that? And it's like, yeah, we can do that with the things you have right in front of you. And it's suddenly, it opens up all this capacity to so many people. And I just think that, I mean, the hunger for the kinds of people who could help people do this, it was beyond the means of most people to truly take advantage of what the computers can do for them. Because they didn't have a you or a me in their house or in their company, right? And so they were unsatisfied. And now they're like, well, wait a second. If I just spend a little bit of time saying what I want, I can get 99% of the way there for fairly trivial amount of time spent. And I think it's fantastic. Because I've always loved just using computers. I've been using computers since I was a kid. I love them. They're so much fun. I mean, you're not going to get me to say, oh, this thing is bad because it's a bad computer. It's like, I didn't care. I just wanted to use a computer and have fun with a computer. And this makes it so much easier to have fun with a computer. I've probably done more projects in the last 6 months than I have in 30 years of my life. Because I'm like, oh, I know what to do. I don't have to relearn, some API standard that I've relearned 15 times in my career.
Yeah, that's right.
Or change it slightly for this new interface and all the rest. Okay, I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but I bought this weird cabinet from Hong Kong, okay? And it came in 3 crates through the port of Los Angeles, and then was trucked up to Seattle where I live. And then I almost broke my hand getting this thing out of the crate and getting it into the house. But what it is it's basically, it's like a transformer cabinet, right? And I've got one of those ultra short throw projectors, and it sits inside the cabinet. And when you open the cabinet, it pops the short throw projector out, and then it opens a little flap in the back, and then a screen rises up. And then the projector projects against the screen. It doesn't work great, right? It's got a little ESP32 driving all the sensors and motors and all the rest. And I'm like, oh, this is not working very well. So I emailed the company. I'm like, hey, can you get me like a spec sheet or something? And there was real language barriers. And so they sent me like a Bluetooth application I could side load on Android so I could control it and tweak some of the numbers. And so I brought it in and I tried it out and it was fine. I wasn't worried about malware or anything like that. It was just really poorly written. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say to, I think it was Amplifier Claude, and I was like, I want you to disassemble this APK and tell me how it's communicating with the cabinet. And so it did it, and it was kind of amazing. It's like, oh, this is a perfect SAN, program written in Unicom, so they only have to write one thing. They don't have to write it for iOS and Android. And here's probably how it's doing it. And there's a mechanism for uploading firmware. And I was like, oh, go into that, download the firmware, and then disassemble the firmware and tell me what's happening on that cabinet. And then I went the next step, and I was like, I want to create an emulator for the cabinet. And these are all things I could have done personally, but it would have taken me months. You know? And so I'm at the point now where I have an emulator for the cabinet running in a web interface that I can try new versions of firmware against. And so the next step is writing my own firmware so that I can better control the cabinet. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you how frustrating it is. Sometimes after it closes, it thinks it's closed the flap for the screen, but it doesn't, because it's got an error in the sensor where it thinks it's closed, but it's not.
There you go.
And I want to fix that. So,
well, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's funny because, people always talk about things like, have we hit AGI for programming, all these things. And I always laugh and I go, well, number one, right now, I'm sure that agents we've been are writing device drivers and like COBOL. And if you think about all of those things, I always joke that, every industrial revolution depended on essentially slavery. And I'm like, I think agents are going to be our indentured servants. But I go, because it'll do all the mundane things that we know we could do, but we don't want to do.
Exactly. So the point of these agents, the point of these tools is to reduce the toil, right?
Yes.
It's like, I've been saying this about open source literally for 30 years. It's like, I don't want to rewrite a piece of software that's already been proven is honestly probably be pretty secure at this point and has had a lot of people tweak it and make it perfect. Why would I want to rewrite that? I want to use that as the foundation for what I'm going to create, right? And these LLM tools are so good at that. And I'm like, hey, I want to do this thing. what tools do you think are the best to bring in for this? Let's do that, And it's like you have this back and forth where it's like you're talking to an enthusiastic junior programmer, but it's kind of great, It's like, oh, I can get way more out of my time with the computer now because I'm not spending all the time setting up build systems and deployment and CI/CD and tests and all the rest. It's like, just do this for me, and then we're going to keep iterating until it's closer to what I want.
Well, I think relative to what you talked about, I think that's what's going to be fun to me, because it's like if someone doesn't understand how development works, they'll ask it to do something, but we're pretty close to where, the LLM will understand how to write in Verilog. There'll be an FPGA there. It'll write something that will be better because the person doesn't understand that I can't do chip design and systems design and software design all at the same time, but the LLM will say, sure, why not? It'll be the most efficient thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because as you get more specialized, as you get closer to the chip or closer to a device driver's special little tweakiness, the presence of information that LLMs have consumed, it's not as prevalent as like a Python Flask application, right? And so that's where you see these agents becoming so important, right? So it's like we had talked earlier about, getting information into these agents' hands, but I really think that's the next logical evolution of what we used to call developer relations. It's like we're going to talk intimately with the tooling of the developers so the tooling is ready for our platforms. Because right now, if you go to it and you want something that is at all specialized, you have to give it a lot more information. Like I'll do this thing where I'll point it at some documentation or some specification. I'll be like, okay, I want to take this specification and I'm going to make some changes to it for this implementation. And it's like, oh, I haven't seen this before. And it's like, yeah, because nobody uses this one because it's garbage. But, you don't tell it that. You say, I want to evolve it in this way so it's more useful in this manner. And it's really an interesting place because inside just the AI tooling community that is here at the show, it's like we're all building these new ways of interacting, and the LLMs literally have no idea what we're talking about until we tell them through these agentic interfaces, right? So it's like every single booth here, almost exclusively, are talking about how do we inform the LLMs so they can better take advantage of our tool, this layer, this computer, this device.
No, I think you're right. One of the things we had a discussion on internally was like, if you're not open source today, you will not be part of the truth anymore because the LLM won't learn.
Yep.
But it's fascinating because, like, for me, it was like I was talking to the Intel folks and I said, well, you have all this microcode, but it's not open source. But wouldn't you want the LLM to know about that because you might be able to optimize stuff in a really, really meaningful way?
There was this whole thing back when I was at Google. They had done this thing called Floor Mapper. It was for laying out CPUs and traces on chips. There was this constant discussion of like, okay, the EDA vendors think they're doing it better, and then they were deploying their own AI routing routines and all the rest. And watching people compete in that space has been like, this actually used to pass this prologue again. People used to come up to me and they'll be like, yeah, but open source is great, but they're not going to use it for databases. And it's like, well, but they are, and they're like, but but there's that guy who's the specialist in this little corner of like dishwasher maintenance or whatever, the dishwasher firmware. And I'm like, I can guarantee you that there is some guy who is using no end of open source tools to make his Miele dishwasher
of course
work.
Absolutely.
There's always a programmer who wants to do this thing. And it's funny because the original motivation for Android was actually not what it became, but it was, we want to write the last cell phone operating system because the team had worked for Danger where they had done the handspring thing. Yeah. Handspring? No, the Danger phone. And before that, they had worked at General Magic. Yeah. And before that, they had worked at Apple. And somewhere in there, they also worked for B. And then a bunch of them went to go do WebOS. And it's like, they're like, it seems like we have to rewrite a cell phone operating system every 2 to 3 years. We'd like to just write one last time. And that was Android.
Yep.
If you were doing some math, you wouldn't be like, okay, I need to rediscover the calculus before I do this. It's like, no, you're just going to use the calculus. Yep. Leibniz and Newton are fine with you just using it. It's, hey.
So, Chris, give me your hot take. What's your one opinion that you have that's completely contradictory to what everybody else is thinking here today?
I don't really have a hot take outside of most people don't understand how to talk to developers or their tooling here. And the thing is, everyone here is, I hate to say this, they're so far advanced that it's like they don't know real programmers. It's like, I want them to meet some programmers who are not like them so they can see how they can make their lives better. Like, you spend some time with somebody who isn't as thick in it like this, and it's so much fun. You're like, oh yeah, I would look at it this way, and it's like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And it's really funny because you see this in the enterprise context, right? Where people are like, oh well, if you just do this, you're gonna be great. And then you go into one of these fairly not formal and high ceremony, but mature programming organizations, like inside a retail operation, like a Target or a Nordstrom, whatever it might be. And it's like, okay, how do you fit within their processes and their tracking and their ways of deploying technology to the stores? It's like everyone has their special way of using computers to make their lives better.
Yeah.
I sometimes think that as an industry, especially, we lose track of that pretty quickly.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head, because I think the best thing about AI in a lot of ways is that it's going to make everything extraordinarily personal, because it makes it very simple. And, it's like, thank goodness the era of the dashboard is over, is the way I look at it. So,
well, and the thing is, the era of the universal dashboard,
yes,
right?
Yes.
People still want a dashboard, but they want it to say what they need to say, and to pull out the information that's unusual for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like, you need left-handed scissors for a reason, and that's what AI provides from a software context.
It's funny because there's this whole analogy that people like to dive into about bespoke suits and bespoke shoes and all the rest. But if you talk to people who make those kinds of clothing items and the rest, they're like, yeah, for the most part, most people's shoes are kind of exactly the same.
Yes.
Most people's feet, they're kind of the same.
They just believe that they're unique.
No. I mean, they do special things to make them a little prettier, a little nicer, a little whatever. And there's some people who truly need it. Like there was a New Jersey mobster in the 80s who had a very splayed foot. And so he had to go to bespoke makers because no shoe could actually fit him. He had like some genetic deformity when he was a child. And and it was literally too painful for him to wear normal shoes. Maybe that's why he became a mobster. He was a very angry guy. But the number of people who actually need that level of customization, it's been very limited. And then these AI tools, it allows people to say, you know what, I like these shoes, but I'd like them in this color or this pattern or this leather or not leather or pleather or whatever, And so it allows people to say, you know what if I make this truly a personal tool? Yeah. And so the challenge then for the computer industry is like, we've been making tools for millions or for billions of people. How do we make a tool for billions of people that is personalizable and secure and preserves that utility? And that's the real challenge for all of us here. And at places like Microsoft, it's like, wow, there's a billion active users of Windows 11. Think of what that means. How many languages, how many ways of interacting with however many personal and corporate resources that represents. So we are already in a situation where we have this manifold, almost fractal, flowering of what it means to be an operating system for a billion people. It's like Android is, I think it was sitting at 2.5 billion, maybe a bit more than that. Reporting into the Play infrastructure before I left Google in 2023. And it's like, what does it mean for there to be 2.5 billion users? They don't all look the same. They're not all speaking the same language.
No, they're all arguably
there's different formats and screens and foldables and non-foldables and tablets and all the rest. How do you say that any one of those things is the same as anything else?
No, I think you're right. I mean, everybody always focuses on 0 to 1, but maybe in the era of AI, we're thinking about billion to 1. And I think that's the push.
Yeah, I mean, how do you have your tools be useful and personalizable for many, many people?
Well, I think that's a perfect way to finish it off. Chris, thank you so much for being on here. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me and listening to me ramble.
No, I think you can listen to you ramble all day.